Why do we work and why do we want to work in a collaborative manner? I think that's very clear. I mentioned this example with the floppy disk. There were emergency cases at the time when a colleague was ill or wasn't able to attend an event. We had a important article that had to be printed quickly and the editor got stuck in the traffic jam. Now, these days, as a result of the digital technologies, that's not a problem anymore. That's a thing of the past. Of course, we need an internet connection. I'm based in Brandenburg, which is a topic in its own right, but in theory, we've got endless opportunities. Online data storage and exchange of data is something being facilitated by the cloud, by the computing cloud. This is, I mean, when we talk about these technologies, we very often use the English terminology. It rarely happens that we find good German equivalent terms for that. So we keep on talking about the cloud as such. And with this cloud, we want to achieve this objective. You see in this chart various types of computers, handheld devices, tablets, smartphones, laptops that all access a shared storage. Now, how do we put that into a reality? You said that these days you've got a wave of providers. How do you choose the right provider? How do you navigate this jungle? This is something that you needed to ask yourselves before you choose a provider, no matter whether we look at the cloud providers themselves or other tools. Now, if we take a look at the largest and most well-known providers, and this is not an exhaustive list, by far not, but these are the providers that anybody has heard about, I think, in Dropbox or Google Drive. And you mentioned it rightly, many of the providers come from the United States. And when it comes to data privacy, that's an important topic to be kept in mind. But in addition to that, there is another workshop coming up on the topic of data privacy. This much as I may disclose at this juncture, and Yara is going to tell you more at the end what's coming up on that occasion.
As for now, what we can talk about is the General Data Protection Regulation that has been in force since 2018, because it states not that certain things cannot be used anymore. They mention the level of security and which level is acceptable or which kind of data are processed. Because unlike some might assume, there is no such thing as a blacklist listing tools and applications that are prohibited or that you should not use. This does not exist. You have to decide that on an individual basis, especially when we talk about processing data that affect children or young people, or if we talk about data that contain health information. They have to be handled in a more sensitive way according to the GDPR. Compared to the kind of data that most of you handle, as far as I understand, this is not about healthcare data or sensitive data of that kind, but more of an artistic background. So for you, you can relax. The US American services are not bad for you per se. What you have to take a look at, however, is the general terms and conditions, and if you can sign a contract or not. But these are details that we will tackle in March when we have our data security event here. Most of the offers tend to originate from the United States, or at least this is where most of them are developed, and some of them branch out to Germany or Europe, and this is more or less the situation. The famous Silicon Valley, of course, tries to live up to its reputation. Now, let us take a look at some of the services in more detail. Say we need a cloud service. We need a cloud where we can store our data, video, images, text, press releases, whatever it is. And we want to store that in a cloud in a nicely sorted way so that the data is acceptable for everyone. What are the offers? Here are a few parameters that you should examine closer. For me, the first question is how many people will have access in total? What is the content I would like to share? How large are the files? Because you may know this from everyday life. Text files or PDF are quite small when it comes to storage space, but as soon as we talk about images and videos, your storage system is full quite soon. Dropbox offers a free of charge service for 2 gigabytes. This is okay for public relations, but as soon as you use photos and videos, it will not be sufficient anymore. That brings us to the next question. Do we have a budget, and are we willing to spend it on that? Dropbox. Okay, standard server, as we said before, is located in the United States. If you decided to pay for it, choosing Dropbox Professional, you can actually change or choose that location. That's a little detail that's good to know. But even if the provider is headquartered in the United States, then the premium version, the same is true for Zoom, by the way, allows you to select a server location in Europe that is subject to the GDPR. Just the basics, the General Data Protection Regulation is a European regulation, which is why naturally it is binding for EU member states and not outside of the European Union. And the Privacy Act, for example, failed. That was an agreement between the European Union and the United States, trying to aim at a similar security level for bilateral services. But this act failed, the Privacy Act, and now everybody is looking for possibilities to put it on a sound legal basis. And this would be a server location in the European Union, or you actually conclude a data processing agreement. Okay, so Dropbox, the basics, once again, 2 gigabytes, and Google Drive already shows us that in the free of charge version, they already offer 15 GB. If you use it for one single project and set it up for that instead of a permanent solution, then of course you have a lot more storage space available, and Google Drive already allows you to use and develop your own texts or tables or sheets. Google started in 1998 as a search engine, but now, if you want to put it in positive terms, is offering a well-working system that's as accurate as a Swiss clock with all the little wheels fitting together perfectly. Just take a look at all the Google services that you're using. If you try and count, then in my case, there are actually many services. I start with Google Maps for navigations. I have a Samsung mobile phone using Android as an operating system, designed by Google. YouTube as a video platform is run by Google. Then there's Google Mail, naturally Google. It's one of the most popular email providers. So actually it's a number of services. So I do understand if people feel a bit bad about that. If you use all the Google services, then of course you know that you're entering a universe and all your data are passed in the hands of one company. So of course you have to find out for yourselves. If you don't like it, then you can consider other security measures to counteract that. But on the positive side, Google Drive, when it comes to performance, more often than not, offers comparable, very good tools, or sometimes when it comes to performance alone, they actually have the best offer, depending, of course, on your needs and tastes. Of course, they make a lot of advertising using the 15 gigabytes of storage space. And Microsoft, especially when it comes to companies in Germany, often is an alternative for that. Of course, I would like to mention a few German solutions. There is web.de and the online space. You may have an email account from web.de. Often, the email provider already offers you an integrated cloud as an extra service. This is also true in the case of web.de, where the free of charge version offers you 2 gigabytes. So the 2 gigabytes of Dropbox is something that you can get from web.de. And the advantage here is that the server is located in Germany and hence subject to the general data protection rule. And of course, we would have to check if this is relevant 4 years later, but at least in 2019, the web.de online storage was awarded a prize by Stiftung Warentest. You can just take a look at it. Sometimes it's a very simple decision. If you already have your account with web.de, then of course it's just a simple step to use the online space as well, the cloud space. Here you can read it once again. If you register, you get 2 gigabytes of cloud space free of charge. And if you need more, then you can take a look at the rates. You get 50 gigabytes for merely €1 per month. And here you can see what that actually means. It's approximately 4 hours of video material or 100,000 documents, 10,000 photos. As we said before, photos and videos, of course, need more space. And well, you can just take a look around and you can search for German providers. Some of them try to copy the offer of web.de. Then there is HiDrive by Strato and online service providers located in Berlin. I am based in Neukölln, a neighborhood of Berlin, so also a Berliner. And by the way, they offer end-to-end encryption. This is something that should be included as a standard service. Maybe you know it from your messengers on your smartphones. If you use WhatsApp or Signal, then the encryption makes sure that the device sending a request and the device receiving it, that is communicating back, that this path is encrypted from the beginning to the end, hence end-to-end encryption. And now this path is safe and can be intercepted by third parties along the way. This should be a minimum standard that is offered by all the providers that you take a look at. HiDrive by Strato has very good security evaluations, and now we can once go through our list of questions. How many people will participate? What kind of data do we want to store? Are they sensitive? Because, for example, it contains videos or recordings with children or young people. In that case, I'd opt for a German or European solution, or at least tend towards it if it affects general public relation. I will just stick to this example because if you need more, then of course you can also use the 15 gigabytes offered by Google Drive in order to start out with a bit more space and a bit more options, and still it is free of charge. Then there is OneDrive, which many of you might know. This is the offer provided by Microsoft. They actually have put together quite a large package. You can use Microsoft Teams, which is the Microsoft chat or video conferencing system. And you can use Teams and Skype. These are two of the most popular video conferencing tools, and they both are owned by Microsoft. Zoom actually ranks first now, but actually that's a result of the pandemic. So once again, OneDrive by Microsoft, Google Drive by Google, Dropbox as a slightly smaller US provider, and of course Apple's iCloud. Of course, once again, if you already use an Apple device, or if you know that your staff uses Apple devices that they were handed from the organization or are owning, then of course iCloud is just as attractive as OneDrive would be for Microsoft computers. Of course, you do not have to use it. You might as well use alternative systems, but of course, this can already have an influence on your first decision. Another German provider, by the way, is the Magenta Cloud. That is German Telekom. Telekom offers a telecom cloud. Maybe you have to decide on the basis of to what extent you would like to use the cloud professionally, but also privately. You can do both in parallel. So once again, you have to look for the smallest common denominator of everybody using it, and then you have to try to keep the obstacles as small as possible for everybody involved. Now, once again, these are the rates for the Magenta Cloud. We've seen web.de, 50 gigabytes for 99 cents, and the Magenta Cloud offers 100 gigabytes for, well, slightly less than twice the price. So personally, for me, the difference is that maybe you are using telecom services already, and maybe then you can combine this. It has to be your decision on of what's most important for you. Okay, what does a cloud storage space look like? Let me just use Google Drive and Dropbox because these are the ones that actually I use professionally. At my university, we use a different cloud service, but of course, the temptation of using 15 gigabytes for free is always there. And personally, I have decided that the data that I'm storing and processing there do not have a private relation, so the GDPR tries to protect mostly personal data that could be used to identify an individual. And the worst that you can see in my cloud is the grades that my students received. Of course, it wouldn't be funny if that was made available to the public, but apart from that, you wouldn't find anything that will not be made public at some point anyhow. For example, these are my own texts and related to my teaching. Christiane has a question. Yes, thank you. Google offers Google One, which is a kind of enlargement of your cloud space. The rest is for free. And then there is a business model, Google Workspace, which also comes with the cloud storage. And I think the price is the same. As far as I know, the Google Workspace with this cloud complies with GDPR because the server then is located in Germany. Am I right? Because the free of charge version does not comply with the GDPR because the server may be located in the United States. I just wanted to ask that if this is correct, that Google Workspace and the cloud it offers, now, of course, it's a larger application, but it complies with GDPR. And the second thing that came to mind, I remember having read somewhere that Google, well, as you've said before, in a way can watch you. So you have data, you want to store them, like a backup, for example, for a longer period of time because the exchange was so fruitful in a program. Then I have heard that if they see something that does not fit their general requirements, they delete it. And that, of course, would be a shame. Is that correct, that they can actually have access to your cloud and that they even can delete things? No, that's not correct. What Google does is they have a very strict threat policy. That means anything that could be a potential virus, here they at least would send feedback. but they would not delete anything from our files without asking, because that's against their terms and conditions. I'm not sure where you found that. I'd be interested in hearing that from you, because I've never heard that before. I can look it up, but to be honest, I don't think this is possible. I have to say, I find it hard to imagine. I have to say that I read it at a competitor's site where it was stated that this could happen. And I thought, well, this would be a shame if they deleted something important, because that would actually really matter to me. And as I've said before, Google Workspace comes with a big cloud too. And here I've heard that it is regulated by the GDPR. I don't know if they have access to your data then or not, but Google does offer a lot of storage. And here you'd be according to GDPR. Well, yes, just once again, as I've said before, there is no list of providers. What happens if there is a kind of data violation? Then there are data protection authorities. They then check what was done in order to handle data safely. And there are different ways of handling data. Some regions or federal states in Germany are stricter than others, but essentially, performance beats security. It's not about trying to hurt or limit ourselves or use apps that are significantly slower or offer less functions compared to a provider that actually fits our user profile. But what would they do if data were violated? For example, if pictures found their way into the web that are not supposed to be there because we did not really store them safely. If the data protection authority reviews that, then they would ask, why didn't you go for a comparable provider with the servers in Germany or at least the European Union, and as such complies with GDPR? But it's a myth that all the providers from the United States are evil. There are even recommendations. The Berlin Data Protection Authority, for example, is rather strict. When the pandemic started and everybody was deciding on which conference tool to use, they consistently advised you not to use US providers. Now, with the option to select the server location, that you can actually have a data processing agreement, then I think you can do that, and you can at least hoist it up to a level where that's okay.
I, for one, would never maintain that I feel 100% comfortable with these providers, but it's just a risk assessment. You need to ask yourself, what could happen worst case, and can I live with the consequences? So with the online storage that I use, I don't have any content that could backfire or that would have a personal impact on me, where I'm saying, oh, shouldn't do that. No, what you refer to is the Google Plus subscription. That is what I have. It's this one. I pay around 20 euros and get 100 gigabyte per year. And you can upgrade that. And there's only, well, from the premium version on, you have the Google Workspace included already here in this subscription model as well. Now, they want to present it in such a manner as if it were urgently necessary to do it. But once you've concluded the data processing agreement, you can already use the smaller models and schemes. I know that from the Landfrauenverband, they use Google as a storage medium. Data privacy authorities don't like to see that, but it's not something that would be sanctioned or that would be prohibited. Silke. Thank you. I've got an entirely different question. I just checked Strato and thought it sounds interesting and exciting, but then again, there's also a limitation of the number of users. Now, my question is, does that mean one user only, that others can't post anything there or upload anything, or that they can't work with this cloud? What does it mean? I didn't really get it. That is an essential factor. If it's limited in terms of the number of users, I couldn't use it for a larger organization with 30 users. Answer, well, there are some tricks. You can either set up a generic account. Here you can share with up to 5 people. That's the equivalent limitation. But if you have one account for public relation, for accounting, another one, and yet another one for any other area that you need, this is how you can circumvent this limitation in the number of users. Now, what Google has in mind is that you're dealing with individual persons, but that necessarily needs to be the case. As long as you make sure when you use generic accounts that if various persons have access to that everything would stay safe. The traceability, who did what when, is something that you give up if you give up personal accounts. Let me show that by means of an example file. I think I'm in the wrong folder here. I work at a university, and here I'm going to choose an example. And it's the Code University based in Berlin, and they also use OneDrive. And now that's another security factor, the two-factor authentication. You not only can work with username and password, but with the second code in addition to that. You can only log in if you have confirmed on your mobile phone that it's you who wanted to access this site. Now, for instance, we are offering a workshop for students who have problems to work scientifically. And in such a document, for instance, you can trace who wrote what at what point in time. This is not possible if you share an account between various people. So this is a personal account only for myself. If you wanted to circumvent that, of course, tracing is not possible. But using it is also possible then. If you have to register with a mobile phone, then everybody needs to have their mobile phone at the ready. Answer, no, you can log in on various devices at the same time. That's not an obstacle. But Christiane, were your questions answered by this? Yes, thank you very much. Everything is clear now. Well, and we need to be aware of the time. We've been focusing on the cloud topic for quite a while. Now we're going to take a look at some other details, but the 3 points that I wanted to bring across is that there are no completely prohibited services. You just need to make sure or find ways and assess the risks of what to do so that you work in a safe manner. It's strongly advised to conclude a data processing agreement, and then these offers can be used. Now, you can also ask the data privacy authority whether there was a comparable service with a comparable offer. And only if you say, yes, there was one identical or equivalent, then the assessment of the data privacy office would be different as if it were not the case. Now, it seems that you're quite familiar with the way a cloud is structured. There are 2 types of clouds. You can either access your cloud over a web browser, like I'm doing it. You go to the domain and you then work on your virtual drive. you see the Google Documents, Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, which Google Slides is something like a PowerPoint. Sheets is a spreadsheet calculation, and Google Forms allows you to put together some forms to make queries. You can also upload non-Google formats and file formats. You can upload a Word document, as you can see here. You can put everything in folders, and this icon tells me that I'm sharing this folder with other people. They have access to it. This is shown by means of this little icon of a person. Now, this pertains to a point that we're going to take a look at in more detail later on, access management, which looks at who can share, who can access, who can edit files. We're going to do that for all services, so I'm going to go there later, if that is okay. Right. That's a list of questions that you needed to ask yourself. Which type of data do you want to edit and work with? How sensitive is the data that you're working with? How much storage do you need? And how important is storage volume? That may be the most important criterion depending on your case. How many persons do you want to work with? Which types of communication are necessary? Do you have an integrated feature that allows you to comment? Is there a chat feature integrated? Can you also hold a video conference directly from inside this service? And the large competition means that the services offered are increasingly lavish. You normally get packages of various tools that allow you to do quite a lot. Editing rights is something that we're going to shed light on later. This just means that you identify and specify who can read documents only, who can edit them, and who can publish data. If you want to exchange data on a one-off basis, it gets me back to my floppy disk from 25 years ago that I mentioned in the very beginning of my presentation, then if that is the case, you may also want to use file sharing services. If you don't want to set up a cloud, if you don't want to do it, another option would be to use something like this service. This is just by way of an example. It is quite a popular service called WeTransfer.com. This allows you to upload files or folders. You can either send an email transfer to an already defined email address on transfer link. The disadvantage of a transfer link is that anybody who has this link can open it. Now, an email transfer means that only a single person can access this file. Now, in the basic version, you can also send data with a maximum volume of 2 GB, and the person receiving the link then can also access the content. If you want to send around social media kit or larger videos from a project of yours, then you need to make sure that your file is not larger than 2 GB. So that's what you can do with the for free version. At times, of course, you also have to look at how much storage you need, how much data you want to send. You probably know this from emails. There is a maximum file size of 20 to 25 megabytes that can be attached to emails with the classical providers. Anything larger, with anything larger, you need to check how you can send it. If you're dealing with files of a size of up to 2 gigabytes, you can use file transfer services like WeTransfer without having to set up a permanent account. It is a one-off thing, a one-off file transfer. So before you study that, if you're really dealing with a one-off event, you may want to use such a service. Now, What we keep in mind generally, not only when we talk about the cloud, is that you work with standard encryption, HTTPS. It's the standard, but still I'd like to mention it. If you see these letters, HTTPS, the site is encrypted. If that is not the case, a website which doesn't use HTTPS is something to be taken with caution, or best is to stay away from it altogether, because the communication with this site is not secure. Well, we have received some hint in the chat. I mean, who wrote it? Let me see. Dirk. Dirk, thank you. Dirk wrote, to avoid unauthorized access by hackers and the providers themselves, storage services can be used through an end-to-end, with an end-to-end encryption like Trezorit. That's right. Such a cloud service can be used over a web browser, but can also, and I do that, can be used with a desktop client. That's an application that you install on your computer. In this case, it's the Dropbox app. It just gets integrated into your folder structure, file structure. My Dropbox looks like a normal run-of-the-mill Windows folder. It's always the question what you prefer, how you prefer working. As soon as the Dropbox folder itself has been stored locally on your device, that means that you tie up some storage capacity on your device. That's the downside, but if you sync files, that can be done much more easily as compared to saying on your web browser that you have to upload your content each time you work on them. But what Dirk mentioned also and referred to is that if you don't have so much trust into whether somebody wants to read your content or whether the service provider has access to your content, you can resort to an additional encryption. There are various providers who allow you to do that. Croco Crypt Mirror. Last time I checked, it was available only for Windows systems. But there's a similar service, VeraCrypt. What doesn't work anymore, unfortunately not anymore, and maybe some of you have already used it as a feature, is Boxcryptor. This has been completely integrated into Dropbox. That was a very nice offer. And if you imagine the cloud to be like a treasure box, a treasure chest, then you need to have a key to unlock that. And Boxcryptor worked on that basis, although it's not available anymore. Croco Crypt Mirror, VeraCrypt, and many others. This is a non-exhaustive list, as I said before. These services then increase the level of safety. Now, the question is always, how important is convenience as compared to securities? These additional encryptions can slow down your workflow. If you first have to decrypt, decode a file before reading and editing it, it might take another couple of seconds before you're able to do that. That's a downside, of course, but particularly when you're dealing with sensitive data, it makes a lot of sense. So thank you very much for this additional remark. You mentioned Trezorit in the chat. That could also be listed here as well on this slide. Well then, let's move on to the next topic, collaborative editing and project collaboration. These are editing programs that allow us to work on the same document in real time at the same time. We already mentioned Google Docs, but I'd like to start with CryptPad or Etherpads. CryptPad has the better reputation in as much as it's safer, more secure, and you can choose from a wider range of options. That's how it looks like, cryptpad.fr. FR stands for France. It's a top-level domain. So we see that GDPR requirements are complied with, and you can see here also on the right-hand side, you can choose various types of documents, a sheet, Excel type, rich text for a word processing document, and whiteboard, slides. All that can be done. Let's start with a rich text document. And as a matter of fact, it's relatively straightforward. It takes some moments because there are other security provisions coming in. But that's the ready-to-use editor, the kind of which you know it from Apple Pages or Microsoft Word. Here you see the various icons for editing, whether you want to align it left, center, right, block type. So that's our text document that we're now ready to edit. On the right-hand side, you see users. The only users is myself. Guest, I haven't logged in. Now I can edit that and put in my own name. So I see it twice now. It doesn't matter. Now, if I wanted to draft the press release or a handout for this workshop, there are various examples for which you could use it. Then you can share over this button share. I can share this Etherpad, and I need to define the access rights. The person who receives the link, what should they be able to do? If I click on edit, that means that everybody who has this link can also write and edit this document. If I select alternatively view, those who have the link and receive it can only view it. If I talk to the managers, to my superiors without then being able to edit it, I would probably choose the view option. But if I wanted to invite everybody to collaborate in this document, I would press edit, copy the link, and share it with you over the chat feature in Zoom. So if you like, why not try out writing in this document together with me, and we put together a document of sorts.
Okay, the first ones have already joined. Okay, many of you have joined. And now if I take a look at this, click at this icon here, then I can see the user list. Okay, it's switched off because more than 8 persons have joined, but I can use the CryptPad chat in order to give advice or say hi to you, and then we could start right away. Okay, somebody has written down CryptPad already, and now I can use this bubble in order to include comments, and in that way we could edit this document together in real time. And especially if you work according to the 4I principle in order to avoid mistakes or not to forget anything. What does that mean? Do comments appear in the chat as well? No. Comment is a comment and the chat is something else. They are independent of each other. Comments always make reference to the selected passages of text. Let us just take any kind of text in order to have something. Let's use the lorem ipsum generator. And back we go. Okay, so let's just say that this is the text we want to edit. And this is a section that I would like to comment on. Then I can do this here. Something's wrong here, Daniel has just written in his comment. And then it is highlighted, and if you click on it, say the first one, if I click on the first highlighted section, if I click on it with my left mouse button, then you can read who the comment is from and what it says. It's quite similar to Word or other editors. So actually, this is just a kind of direct online implementation of that principle. It's similar if you work with Google Drive or a Microsoft tool. So of course, that's the question. If you already use certain Google services, or if you are already connected to Microsoft because you use Teams, then you have to ask yourselves if it makes sense to outsource it, or if you might not as well just use the system, or if you use CryptPad for that. If you compare the CryptPad menu with YoPad, which is the CryptPad alternative, then this is what it looks like. Or we can just open a new one. That's what it looks like. For example, if you want to open a new Etherpad, then it's just as simple. All you have to do is you have to give your pad a name. I have just did that with BFDK 9.2. That is 9th of February, and then what you get is a similar editor, but it is actually smaller, leaner. It's boiled down to the essentials compared to CryptPad. Of course, you can choose bold, italics, you can underline, but CryptoPad, I believe, offers clearly more options, so the difference is obvious. What they both have in common, by the way, you have a comment function here as well, if you click on that plus icon, but here we do not have oh yes, we have an integrated chat. Okay, sorry, I forgot about that. So on the right-hand side, you can find a chat. What they also have in common is that you can export the files that you have developed together. The sharing symbol is identical. It's these 3 connected dots, and you find it here in this pad, a link that gets you to the pad. And if you want to export it, then you see these 2 arrows pointing in opposite direction, and you can click on those in order to export it as a Word document, a PDF, or an open document format. That's also a text file. It's just not formatted like Word. Maybe you do know OpenOffice. It's a free of charge version of Word, and that's the document it would have had. Or you can even use HTML for websites. So that's export, clicking on the arrows. And in the case of CryptPad, let me just look for it. I don't know where you found it. You click on File. That was it. You click on File, and then you find Export. And here you can choose the format. For example, you've got doc, HTML, and PDF apparently is not an option anymore. It used to be. And now you can export the file and then, I don't know, send it around via email or continue editing it. And a lot of it is actually learning by doing. Here, the main difference is that CryptPad offers a lot more functions in terms of text editing. When it comes to comments and chats, then the 2 options are actually quite similar, if not identical. You can, by the way, also upload existing files. You've got this import-export function. For example, you already have a first draft for, say, a press release, and you want people to take a look at it, and then you can click on Browse and upload the file in question by clicking on it and selecting it on your desktop, and then it is uploaded. Of course, if it is a rather big, complicated Word file that is already formatted, then maybe this can cause more problems with Yopad than it would in CryptPad. So for a first attempt, my recommendation is not to format it in too complicated a manner before you upload it. And another option would be to start the document from scratch together. And now we will start with the second part, unless something came to mind during the break and you would like to ask a question now. If this is not the case, Sebastian? Okay, I think you should be able to hear me now. Just a quick question regarding the last item, CryptPad and Co. Just your take on things. If I use Google Drive, I've got the same function integrated in Google Drive. In your view, are there any advantages, or why did you name it here as an alternative for those who do not use Google Workspace? Yes, exactly. Well, the question is always, how long do you want to cooperate, or what kind of process are we talking about? For example, if we keep using the example of press release, PR, so there is one deadline and you are working on one document together, but just once, you are not going to repeat it in a month's time, for example, then you can use that. Just like WeTransfer, if you only want to transfer files once, it works. But of course, essentially, you're right, Google Drive and other providers such as Microsoft with Teams, for example, they offer you the whole package. And depending on how comfortable you feel using that, or how good your introduction to these applications is, you have to decide, is it worth doing that for a group of 5, 10, or 20 people, or is it easier to use CryptPad as an alternative for just one-time cooperation? So I'm not telling you what to use, I'm just showing you what there is. Question. I just wanted to know what your view on things is, because sometimes it's also good to know that you can also maybe reduce the variability of the programs. If it's less complex, you can use something less complex. That was my question. But you've just named WeTransfer by means of comparison, so that's what you're talking about. Precisely. What I actually have realized working at my university or with media is the following: as long as it's an internal process, if it's just your department, for example, then we do have our standard set of tools. But sometimes if you want to work with a third party, then your IT department starts frowning, well, granting access rights to yet another person, then sometimes they don't like it. And you can use certain tools internally or use Google solutions. But if it is about trying to avoid having to invite a third person into an existing system, then you can use these one-time solutions. But when it comes to this, we'll come back to that later. But as we are talking about it now anyway, I will just send you my email address, because if you have any questions that pop up after the workshop, then of course you're welcome to drop me a line, or we can see if there is one particular solution that's best suited for your purposes. I don't think we'll be able to do that due to the number of participants, but if you want to or already have wondered what is suitable for you and what isn't, then of course just send me an email. I have just sent my email address to you in the chat. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more raised hands, and that means that we come back to that point. CryptPad and Etherpad, this is what we have just taken a look at, and you can compare it with the Google Docs, for example. You have your own Google Drive, and if you open a new file and set it up, then you might as well use Google Doc, and you get the same editing options, and you can use the share button in the top right-hand corner to share it. Maybe it's also about avoiding or not avoiding Google. If you're already using Google services anyway, as I've said before, using the metaphor of the Swiss clock, if you use them, then all the wheels are aligned to each other in a perfect way. So, okay, let's just do a boring one. I've given it the name of test. And what happens then is you have general access. Actually, my account is set in English, which is why you get all the questions in English too. So general access, and then you can choose if it's restricted access or not. That means that you can tailor it to different groups, and you've got the copy link function. Again, that's the link that you are sharing, and now you can add people. These are all colleagues of mine, and now I can select giving them editing rights or just viewing rights. I'm the owner, and this is exactly what we've seen for CryptPad before. Here you've got view or edit as access options. Edit means you have rights to edit the file, and view is you can only take a look at it. And Google actually offers a third option. That's the commenting option. You can view and write comments, but you cannot edit. So they have 3 levels. And when it comes to the function, they're actually quite similar. And here I could invite you, but I guess I won't do this here because of our time constraints. But once again, it's a similar framework, apart from the fact that we are here, part of the Google universe, which means that we have significantly more functions than we have for CryptPad. So Yopad is the simplest version, CryptPad offers a few more options, and Google, only when it comes to functions, is the most extensive one. Because, for example, you are part of the Google universe, you can link it to your calendar, or even Google Maps is already integrated in that, which is what brings me back to the analogy of the Swiss clock again. Nina, there is a question? Yes, there is. I often work with different people, many of whom refuse to work with Google. And sometimes if you want to join, you need a Google account. And in the case of CryptoPad, you do not need a specific account. You can just click on the link. Exactly. It's good that you mentioned that. In the case of CryptPad, you could generate an account, but it's not a must. That's the initial page of CryptPad. You can then sign up, which comes with a few advantages in terms of sharing files. But if you just want to quickly set up a file, then you do not have to do that. And you can just use the link you get in the end, and then you can also open the document again. But let us just take a quick look at that, because CryptPad offers different rates as well. The for free version that we have just seen, you've got access to all the applications, so all kinds of files that you can set up there. The main difference, in my opinion, is, say, we compare it against the premium version, then here you get extra storage space. For example, here you get 50 gigabytes, which actually is quite a bit of space. And you can upload up to 150 megabytes. So it is actually an alternative to Google and the likes. And registered only means that you have a CryptPad account. The account still is for free. You do not have to pay for it, and still no personal information is required. But the advantage is that you already get a personal storage of 1 gigabyte. We have now just worked with the simplest version using a guest status, and of course it is possible to log in to get your hands on a few more advantages, and in the premium case you even get a cloud function that is part of it. Did that answer your question, Nina?
Yes, it did. And Lisa is also right, you can work as a guest with Google. If you share these files, but at least the author of the document needs to have a Google account. That's a big difference. Now with GridPad, you don't have to register at all, but with Google, at least the initial author has to be registered. All the other users don't need to have a Google account. Just a brief recommendation, particularly if you store data on the cloud, which is becoming ever more popular and which is justified, you should still store some backup copies on a hard disk. That can be decisive also when it comes to GDPR aspects. If you've got receipts, invoices, content that must not get lost. For instance, there are certain terms that you adhere to. Everything that has something to do with the tax authorities needs to be stored for at least and retrievable for at least 10 years. So if you then say that you totally trust on the cloud service provider to take care of that, that could be negligent if push comes to shove. Of course, you need to have that original trust that what you store there continues to be accessible to you, but there is no thing like 100% safety when it comes to online activities. No matter whether your passwords are super safe. It can also happen that as a result of cyber attacks, hacker attacks, and things like that, certain services, certain data is not accessible anymore, even if that happens on a temporary basis. So I made it a habit of mine to work with an external hard disk, and once per year or twice per year, I put all my data on an external hard disk. Free File Sync is a service that can be used to that end. This service just compares the data on your hard disk and the data stored on the cloud, and then within a short space of time, you can have it synced. Now, when it comes to Free File Sync, this service does not access the web cloud. That is what you access over the browser, but it looks at the folder structure on your hard disk. So it makes sense to use a desktop client of a cloud solution and store that data on your device in order to sync data faster, and secondly, to be able to back up your data easily. I think I need a sip of water here, said the speaker. Well, this is just a recommendation, by the way. And there's another recommendation. I used it in the past, but not so much anymore, to be honest. But mind mapping tools can also be found on the web, multitudes of them. So if you need that as an alternative or a tool for brainstorming sessions, if you want to present your ideas in a better structured way, you can use mind mapping tools like mindmaponline.de or mindmaster.com. But again, one needs to be careful at times. These services turn from for free services into paid for services once you reach a certain limit. Let's take MindMaster. And I have to admit, it's been a long time ago that I exited accessed it last time. Let me take a look at the price structure. Exactly. The basic version, which is for free, allows you to set up 3 mind maps that you can edit together with others, and everything that goes beyond that number has to be paid for. Well, around 2010 or so, there was a wave of apps coming up where the technical options available were expanded. Everything worked either on the basis of open source and for free, or were offered as a general service to the public, but it has become a standard that the premium packages offer additional features. They offer either more users to be integrated, but these basic services can always be used to test them. And then later you can decide whether this is doable for your team or whether this is rather not an option that you'd like to work with. Let's see whether I can get in. Just want to quickly show you how it works. You know, we've seen that before. We tried it years ago to see how it works. And you see, it's a very straightforward drag and drop tool. Just by clicking on the plus sign, you can add new content, and you have these automatic lines to connect the various objects. Let's stay with this boring idea of a test. And from here on, we can add more items. So if you like it, if you use it, keep it in mind that this is workable. In the premium versions, you can also use pictures, and here you have standard icons in the basic versions that probably have been taken from publicly available fund sources. If you want to create an overview for new staff that got on board, such a way probably lends itself to describing structures of a company, of work processes, and so on. So you will get these slides sent to you after the workshop, together with a collection of links that might be of interest to you. Working together in real time. On this topic, in this context, I'd like to show you Slack. Open Project is a service that has to be paid for, but it offers you to set up your own projects where you can add your own content. Open Project can be understood as an alternative to Google services, because you can add calendars, you can set up projects, you've got a commons features, and within Open Projects you can also set up your own wiki. I can't show it anymore because we have to pay for it. I'm going to show you a lot of internal information from a university, nothing dramatic. But let me show you Slack. Slack is really different as compared to the solutions shown so far. Slack is this platform. So my computer is struggling. So what's Slack? It is a messenger slash data administration tool. And Slack is special because you can see the chat in real time, like in the messenger system. What we did at the Code University that I work in, we set up 2 areas. Code team, that we're currently in for the faculty, and another separate area for the students at Code University. And within this area, you can set up channels. These channels can be sorted according to various topics that they deal with. My department that I work in is called STS. We've got an STS channel, so we can always see the various members of the STS channel. These are my colleagues from the faculty. The green dots indicate those members who are online or not online with status messages that can be added. And Slack is interesting because it enabled us to do away with the complete email communication. Slack has become our standard channel for communication. There are direct messages. These are chats with individual persons on a one-to-one basis. So it's like when I send a mail to a colleague, only that I've got a chat feature instead of a mail thread. And all the rest works over various channels that you can also mark as favorites, because in our university context, there are far too many channels and not each of the channels is equally relevant. Now, in our daily work, it makes my work easier. I can work with bookmarks. Let's imagine that within the channel, we are sharing various types of content that we all find interesting. We can mark it for later, for reading it later with a bookmark. And what I particularly like about it is the way how you deal with answers. What I mean by that is that answers get clustered. They are grouped. It is a little bit like you know from emails. An answer to an answer to an answer, a thread. So on the right-hand side, you see the initial post, then the various answers that you can also answer to separately, or you work with bookmarks or add emojis or whatever you do there. So if there is some content that may become relevant at a later point in time, you can mark it as unread, or you can also mark it to be reminded of it at a later point in time. So it's a little bit work to set it up and to train your staff. But already the expectation that you can do without email communication and have it replaced by this one. And at the same time, you've got something like an archive. All these features make Slack being relevant to quite a number of organizations. The whole thing looks very similar in Microsoft Teams. I can't show it to you right now, but with the Teams feature, you can set up similar chats over channels with the same advantage, where you're saying, yes, you allow for real-time communication. You can see whether somebody is writing right now. You can also have video conferences on Slack and link it to Google if you want, in order to integrate your cloud solutions into Slack as well. You can do that also with Microsoft Teams. So yeah, with regard to these features, these two solutions are comparable. What else could I share? It's a lot of learning by doing, I have to say. So I can see that some students are writing. I think he needs an, he wants to come in tomorrow. Yeah, right. I thought so. There are channels that I haven't read, at least I haven't read the new content that has been added, and they are marked in bold letters, and everything that I read is in standard letters. What's always helpful is to tag persons. So at Sebastian, for instance, this allows me to actively link this person, so that this individual remains relevant, and I can easily find that person then in reactions. This is a contribution where I got tagged, indicating that it might be relevant to me to check. I'm well advised to read it to see whether there's any action that I have to take on this message. So is that relevant to you? Or are there any questions from your side? Otherwise, we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Well, there's still my offer out there, my email address. If you have any question regarding Slack or any other of the services mentioned, just send me an email. In keeping with what we have seen when I talked about mind maps, there are also an unlimited number of whiteboards and post-it applications. There's something that came out in the chat. Let me check. Could you briefly touch on the advantages of Slack versus Teams? Well, yes. I think it's a matter of taste at the end of the day. What I mean by that is that you check whether something like that is already available. If you got a Microsoft computer in place and you are already using OneDrive as your cloud solution, then it makes more sense, of course, to work with Teams and to link Teams with OneDrive. Now, if you start on a blank page, Slack could also be the version of choice. So the first question is, do you have something from Google or from Microsoft? If that is the case, you either go here or go there. That is Slack or Teams. There is no feature of one service that wouldn't be offered by the other. What about the user accounts for the features? User accounts are necessary for both services, particularly when it comes to Slack. You can set up an account for guests, that is for people who you want to invite on a one-off basis, but that you can invite people you haven't collaborated with just through a link is something that I haven't seen. I haven't seen that it would be so easy, and we never tried it, to be frank. Never tried doing it. So that probably would be easier with Teams. I know that it works with Teams, that you can invite others as one of users. Slack is a closed circle, a closed community. And with Teams, it's easier to share web content or cloud content, rather, with others. So if you work with external collaborators, the combination of choice probably would be Teams and OneDrive as compared to Slack and OneDrive. But I needed to read it up and study it, because normally we have never added guests. I can't remember a single case where we did that. Now, when it comes to rates, I need to check it as well. I don't know for sure whether Slack has changed their price structure. I just checked it. So that's the price structure. In the basic version, it's for free. And then the next level sets you back $675. If you don't need video meetings, the basic version is enough. So my recommendation is to just take a look at the various rates. What's your best option against the backdrop of your own budget, against the backdrop of the services that you have subscribed to anyhow? So if there are various services that you're already using anyhow, you don't need to go to the higher levels in order to get access to it. So you really need to look at the details what are the requirements of the final users? What do they need? Check that carefully before you decide.
And Linda writes, collaborative working is also possible in Slack. Edit documents like you do in Word or Excel. It's the messenger service. Well, in Slack, you cannot do that. As soon as you combine it, then there are so-called plugins or interfaces. But I think it's not just Google, but I would have to look that up myself. Then in that case, yes, but Slack itself does not offer that as a function. Okay, where were we? Right, whiteboards. You may be familiar with some of them. Prezi, at least when I was a student, it really cost quite a run on it because finally you could use something else than PowerPoint, but I think it's just a matter of taste. There is Miro, Mural, Prezi. You will find different providers with different rates. What they all do have in common at the end of the day is presentations like this one. This is just using Miro as an example. Whiteboard in that case actually means that you have an almost unlimited white space that you can use and fill and design more or less creatively. What we did an eternity ago, okay, sorry, now I'm having problems. Okay, what we did a long while ago was, for example, we created just an overview. Well, it's a live seminar, which is why things are not working at the moment. Okay, but now, okay, I think it's actually my laptop's problem and not the tool. Okay, now I've got it. So what we did is we set up a module overview of what we offer in terms of content and code. Just a bit surprised that it looks so blurry. But this is Miro, you might as well use Mural and the likes, and you could use that and use different forms and shapes and colors in order to build up module trees or processes and visualize them. Or you could use whiteboards and include little exercises. I cannot do this here on this map, but what also is possible is you can conduct a survey or hold a workshop using whiteboards like this, and you can visually represent different tables or different areas, and they come with a different and an integrated timer. For example, feedback rounds. You can have a feedback round of 5 minutes. Did you like the workshop? This is about field 1. This is about field 2. What would you like to improve? And you could use whiteboards like these to get feedback because you can split them up, as we know it from the documents. And then it's actually up to you and your creativity. You can then use it for different instructions, or you can just visualize content in a different way. Well, maybe I will find it. Just a moment. We did this once, for example, when it was about finding out how everyone felt during the pandemic, if there were any measures that we could take in order to improve how we work together, or at least lift it up to a level that is okay for everybody. No, sorry, I cannot find it, can't show it. So just picture a large white surface, and this is where the different services offer you the opportunity to use it, create it, design it, use snippets, color codes. What probably is more interesting for you, at least we've already heard a question about that, is wikis. This is something we're familiar with from actual Wikipedia. It was founded in 2001 and now has become the largest online encyclopedia ever. This is the basic design of Wikipedia, and we could set this up for our own purposes. This is the typical Wikipedia menu on the left-hand side, and then you can see the different contents. It's an open source tool, meaning that without any problems whatsoever, you can see how the Wikipedia page is structured. Just a few words of advice. Everybody is free to participate in Wikipedia. You can register, and then you can also post articles or edit existing ones. Unfortunately, this is not so popular anymore, and there are reports over and over again that the German Wikipedia version, which is the third largest, by the way, it has developed a lack of authors. So maybe, I don't know, if you feel like it, you could join in. But nevertheless, the basic Wikipedia structure is something that we can use for our purposes. For example, for telephone lists or certain insurance conditions, be it accidents, insurance, or whatever. And then we could use this, for example, as the point where minutes are collected or where different processes are described when it comes to, I don't know, archiving or knowledge that exists in your company or in your association or wherever. This wiki software is offered by two providers, and I can show you two here. For yourselves, you first of all have to determine who can view or read, who can enter data, and you have to check if you can secure the access to your wiki. So, as I've said before, I've just brought two by means of an example. One is DocuWiki, that is very user-friendly, everybody agrees on. And then there is Media Wiki. Maybe you're familiar with that from pop culture wiki sites. There's one for Lord of the Rings and another one for Harry Potter. This is the alternative. Here you set up your wiki in a browser, but then it contains advertising. In DocuWiki or MediaWiki, there is a workaround, but in order to use that, you need your own server. Let's just take a quick look at, say, DocuWiki. This is what it looks like. That's the initial page. And what they do is they promote Wiki as a multi-varied app that does not use a databases. It's a very clean application. And then there are a few use cases, as we've described before. You can use it to store knowledge for your employees, or you can use it as a private notebook. That's up to you. What is necessary, however, is for you to download it and install it on your own server. There is no way around that. But if this is the case, then you find a folder on your server and then you can install it. With this, you have your own fixed application. When it comes to installation, it's actually foolproof. If you have somebody who's already in charge of your server or your website, then all these scenarios are not too difficult. Here you can find detailed instructions, and they are stored on the sites themselves. For example, information for different operating systems or different web servers. I really don't want to bore you with expert language. but I just wanted to show you where you can find what. And in DokuWiki, this is where you find it, and you have just one page that, if you personalize it, looks like that. That's the more or less wiki layout, and you can use it then for anything you can see here in this wiki. MediaWiki actually is even closer in terms of layout to the real Wikipedia site. And here again, you have to download it, install it. You can use different extensions. For example, you can say you want to integrate a calendar function or whatever it is. So you can just play around with it a little bit. An API, these are interfaces to other web services that you can use in order to embed calendars or other services. You have to check what is compatible and what isn't. I cannot really say it just like that, but the major typical ones, I think they should work. And then there are skins. That means that you can change the appearance of your wiki site, and you can add your own logo or maybe even use your own fonts should you have certain requirements. So that's, once again, MediaWiki and DokuWiki. Here you have your own site, and this is not funded by advertising. I'll just take a look at the chat. For example, fandom.com or CommunityWiki. These are wiki offers that, well, basically you can use for the same end, but they're always full of advertising, and they always have a non-individualized domain in the top bar, so it's different. If you do not know how to code, if you do not have access to your own server, then these are alternatives, but then actually you will see advertising. Who of you does have your own server? Or is there anybody who is interested in a wiki? Maria? Okay, as I've already said, the Wikipedia software is free of charge. There are no different rates or anything, but you have to install it on your own server. And from then on, you can use it like your own website, and it's just your space that you can use. When I worked with the Berliner Zeitung newspaper, we also used an internal wiki where, for example, you could read up deadlines, when articles have to be handed in at the latest, or typical parameters, number of character per headline or teaser. And for example, you could use that for information on your press releases, standard regulations, standard information on your information, a collection of addresses of the most important people in that system, and so on and so forth. And the advantage is that you have a sidebar navigation system. Of course, you might as well use different folders and documents in a cloud, without doubt. But when it comes to handling and design, maybe a wiki is nicer. Okay, and that's it, no but. So it all boils down to your tastes and what best suits your purposes. Okay, a question regarding knowledge structuring. How can I structure my wiki in a sensible way? Decisions I have to make beforehand? Well, I'm happy to say more about that, but of course it always depends on the content you want to store there and the number of people you want to have on board, the number of people who edit things, which is why probably I can't really discuss it down to the smallest detail. But typical mistakes made in structuring files is, for example, choosing terms that are too general. For example, you have a folder called invoices, and all of a sudden you have several invoice folders. So usually you have an invoice folder for every project or a sub-project, and it can be found individually, but it's better to give it a good name instead of just the generic invoices. Of course, people tend to give their files shorter names rather than longer ones, but what we do is we give a bit of context, the semester, the class, and then include all the details that belong to a file. The same is true for pictures, that the file is not named Open Doors Day or Launch XYZ. First of all, we start with a date, and the date format usually follows the American model, meaning that you start with today, for example. The format for today would be this. And if we wanted to store a photo or a picture for this event, then this is the file name. And you agree that all the photos are stored according to the system, that you have internal naming models. For example, in the case of a picture, you start with the date in the US format, 2023, February 09, so that it is actually shown in a homogeneous way. And sometimes then you get pictures coming from your mobile phone and they've got an entirely different name. And in that way is kind of homogeneous. Now, the question is, what's the smallest common denominator that is relevant for everybody? Or what is a file that is self-explanatory? I'd personally cluster. We, for example, have a folder public relations, and within public relations, we have a subfolder named social media. Another one is press releases, and another one is anything else. So then we have another one for preparation. And for example, in a mind map tool, you can agree on structures that make sense for you. There is no typical template that I could give you. There is not one fixed structure, but why don't you just do a test run? You can send someone through your file system who is absolutely external and doesn't know anything about your system, and then the folder path and the folder names would have to be chosen in such a way that that person finds their way across it. I'm sure that you do that on your private computers, that your files and videos are sorted and structured according to a personal system. I'm just taking a look at what I can show you without becoming too personal. But this is, by the way, my Dropbox structure. We could use that. Maybe this helps. I've got a Dropbox in my browser. But I can also use the Explorer. This is my Dropbox. And these are the subfolders. So everything that is work-related goes into work, and then I have finances, I've got my creative file, my health insurance. It's an extra folder because there's so much information, and then there is a to-do folder. And work is structured according to the different areas, the different projects. I've got general assignments, and for each job or assignment, I have a folder. There's the digital compass, whatever works for you. I've got invoices and subgroups that are necessary. And in the best of cases, if you use the search function, then you get a good overview.
So somebody's already leaving. So you just need to see what works in your team. Typical mistakes would be that you distribute some material. Photos of an event go to folder X, but there is a folder Y, which is on a higher level. But you need to make sure that all photos are in the photo folder, and the photo folder itself can be broken down into subfolders, and everything that has got something to do with finances should be stored there in the finances folder, broken down by projects. That's basically totally up to you how you then structure your folder system. Now, in the wikis that I've shown you, in the Toko wiki and in Wikimedia, there was a list of guides, can't find it, which shows what works best. They make very basic recommendations regarding the menu items which make most sense, what has proven to be viable, but I wouldn't overthink it. And Linda's writing, if you don't have an alphabetical order, we work with numbers, series of numbers of the folders according to their level of relevance. That also works. Right, yes. I think we need to touch the topic management of rights and security. And then we're almost through. Let me see how far we get. What we need to keep in mind, no matter which service we are talking about, whether we have our own wiki, our cloud services, or whatever system we're dealing with, we always need to check whether we use generic accounts and generic passwords, finances at xyz.de, or whether we are using individual accounts. There are pros and cons for each. The advantage of a generic account is that assigning rights is much easier. If you know that the accounting department's got this account while the public relations department got that account, then you can exchange roles much easier, particularly if you have some people leaving the team and others joining the team. It's not tied to individual persons. But then again, you also need to make sure that traceability is guaranteed. Normally, you want to check who deleted what, who has passed on content that was not meant to be passed on. To track this is very difficult to be done with generic addresses. But be as it may, passwords need to be set up in a very responsible manner, just like you would do it for your own passwords in your private sphere. And there are three pathways that you can use. You either use a password manager, that is a service like NPass would be the first to come to mind. Doesn't mean that it's the best one. It's a password manager which allows us to set up one master password, and under that master password, what you have stored there are all the other passwords. They are either created by the program or just stored securely, so that you don't have to pick this password and search for it. You entrust it to the app NPass. There are various types of password managers. KeePass might be another one that some of you know. That would be the next one to come to my mind. That's what it looks like. Well, this is something for the more technical oriented people amongst us, but they all offer the same features. in my password manager, I've got 150 accounts that I have with various service providers. It's online shopping services, email accounts, down to messenger services and what have you. So there is a whole load of passwords and services that you have to manage. And that is what you can put into a password manager. But the idea that one tool, single tool, controls all my passwords is something I don't like. If the master password, which I use to access my password, if that gets into the wrong hands, it means that all services I'm using can be used in an unauthorized manner. That's why I'm using the method where I try to remember passwords easily. NPass, is it cloud-based? What do you mean? Do I store my passwords on the cloud? Answer, well, NPass is a service that you install on your device, but it can also be used as a browser plugin. It has nothing to do with a cloud service. Well, you can use it on a cloud service, but you probably shouldn't do it. So if you use your browser and you want to access your railway account of bahn.de, NPass enters the passwords and the user account names automatically. Now, what's the difference between NPass and KeePass? Well, it offers the same services. These are separate applications on your device. And if you work on the browser and you want to access various types of content on the browser, the application responds and gives you recommendations for what account to choose from to enter your password. And there is LastPass. I think that has been hacked. That's totally unsecured. I mean, if it has been hacked, and I think KeePass is much more secure. I am not going to upload my password collection to the cloud. Well, I personally find it difficult to deal with password manager, so it's not my preferred choice. But particularly if you're dealing with larger companies or organizations who need an entirely different set and larger set of passwords, these managers can make sense. So the question is, how many people are concerned? Is it 5 people? You probably, in this case, don't need a password manager in the digital neighborhood, digital Nachbarschaft. There are 50 of us, and we need such a password manager. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to manage this large load of passwords. And an alternative to that, which is a very individual, I believe, solution, is the method where you use sentences to remember passwords. You might have heard about it, and let me explain how it works. What a safe password, a secure password looks like in general terms is something that we all know, 8 characters or more with special characters, punctuation, and so on and so forth. And the method I'm referring to works best in the following manner. You see the sentence written here in German language. Am liebsten esse ich Pizza. You have the first letters of each word, and a number like 4 can be spelled by the number itself. So we all agree that this looks like a pretty secure password. And these sentences, by means of which you remember them, the assumption is that they cannot be recreated by a computer. So I always keep a paper notepad in my backpack. On the last page, I have a collection of weird sentences. If you read that, you would only find funny sentences, weird sentences that make no sense. But I, for one, know that this is the sentence for this and that tool, or the password for a specific service that I have subscribed to. So this is an alternative to using a password manager. Now, out of all the services that I'm using on a regular basis, I don't need my notepad anymore. Normally, I remember my little sentence, and it's also quite funny. The sentence that you use can be based or refer to what you want to use. For my Netflix account, for instance, I had the sentence "Video killed the radio star." So this basically makes it easier for you to remember the sentences that lead to your password for each service. So what you want to use and what you ask your team members to remember is up to you. If you decide to use a password manager for everybody or you leave it up to the individual members, it's up to you. But you need to make sure that the fundamental requirement is met, namely using safe and secure passwords. There are also password cards that work in a very similar manner, like I have just described. Sorry, my voice gets coarse. We have this DSIN password card. It's a German provider or initiative, rather. You have a typical size of a card filled with letters and numbers and special characters. You use a point of departure and then remember a route through this spreadsheet. And this route through the spreadsheet gives you the password then. So whatever you prefer is, I believe, ultimately a question of taste and also depends on the number of persons who are involved. Well, if possible, make sure that you use the two-factor authentication, particularly large services, Google and others, Facebook, they offer two-factor authentication where it's not enough anymore to only use your email address and a password, but there is another authentication factor that comes into play. When I registered to Google, when I wanted to log in, I got a message on my mobile phone, and only when I confirmed that it was me who wanted to log in, did I really get in then ultimately.
And of course, that's important because we will hear more about that when we have our privacy workshop. But what you can always do, both for your private email and your professional ones, is the Hasso-Plattner Institute offers a service called Identity Leak Checker. And you can check if your online identity has been compromised and publicly made available. So I could simply enter my email address here in the simple tool and have the tool check if my email address has been involved in one of the cyber attacks. And I think I already should have an answer. I will just show that. Okay, my Thunderbird just needed an update too. And this is the answer. My result from the HPI Identity Leak Checker is the following. You see a list of all the services that could be affected, ticketcounter.eu or Dropbox. And then you can see the date we talk about, and then password, birth date, first name, last name, whatever we have registered with. And you can see that in September 2012, my Dropbox password seems to have been compromised or made available to other parties. And then you can see the recommended steps in your email. Of course, it will all be in German. And here, the first recommendation is please change your passwords on all accounts where the email address was used, and from the date mentioned here on. And by the way, it's a long list, and this Dropbox case is more than 10 years old. And of course, I have already followed the recommendation, so just start with the first line. Okay, that's as far as our rush through possible knowledge management tools go.
Und zu anderen Modellen übergehen.